Thank you so much for coming out and hearing my talk. Just so you guys know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly read just the introduction from my book, which I think actually ties pretty well into what we're going to be talking about today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, as was said before, why it is so tough to talk about race, and then why we still kind of have to do it anyway. And then I'm going to open up for questions and answers, and hopefully you will be inspired to ask questions now that you've learned why we need to be talking about these things. Now, of course, I expect that we will be kind to each other and respectful of each other when we ask these questions, that we will be considerate of the feelings of people here, especially people who are living with the realities of racial oppression every day and whom this discussion will always take a little bit more out of. So I'm going to start reading. As a Black woman, race has always been a prominent part of my life. I have never been able to escape the fact that I am a Black woman in a white supremacist country. My Blackness is woven into how I dress each morning, what bars I feel comfortable going to, what music I enjoy, what neighborhoods I hang out in. The realities of race have not always been welcome in my life, but they have always been there. When I was a young child, it was the constant questions of why I was so dark when my mom was so white. Was I adopted? Where did I come from? When I became older, it was the clothes not cut for my shape and the snide comments about my hair and lips and the teen idols that would never, ever find a girl like me beautiful. Then it was the clerks who would follow me around stores and the jobs that were hiring until I walked in the door and then they were not. It was the bosses who told me that I was too loud, the comments that my hair was too ethnic for the office, and why, even though I was a valued employee, I was making so much less money than other white employees doing the same job. It is the cops I can't make eye contact with, the Ubers that abandon their pickup, driving on instead of stopping when they see me. When I had my sons, it was the assumptions that they were older than they were, and that their roughhousing was too violent. It was the tears they came home with when a classmate had repeated an ignorant comment of their parents. But race has also been countless hours spent marveling at our history, evenings spent dancing and cheering to jazz and rap and R&B, cookouts with ribs and potato salad and sweet potato pie. It has been hands of women braiding my hair. It has been reading the magic of the words of Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and Alice Walker, and knowing that they are written for you. It has been parties filled with jollof rice and fufu and Nigerian women wearing sequin-covered gowns and giant geles on their heads. It has been the nod to the Black stranger walking by that says, "I see you, fam." It has been pride in Malcolm, Martin, Rosa, and Angela. It has been a room full of the most uninhibited laughter you've ever heard. It has been the touch of my young son as he lays his hand over mine and says, "We're the same brown." Race, my race, has been one of the most defining forces in my life. But it is not something I always talked about, certainly not in the way I do now. Like many people, most of my days were spent just trying to get by. Life is busy and hard. There are work and kids and chores and friends. We spend a lot of time bouncing from one mini crisis to the next. Yes, my days were just as full of microaggressions, of the pain of and oppression of racism as they are now, but I just had to keep going on like normal. It is very hard to survive as a woman of color in this world, and I remember saying once that if I stopped to feel, really feel, the pain of the racism I encountered, I would start screaming and I would never stop. So I did what most of us do. I tried to make the best of it. I worked 50% harder than my white coworkers. I stayed late every day. I dressed like every day was a job interview. I was over polite to white people I encountered in public. I bent over backwards to prove that I was not angry, that I was not a threat. I laughed off racist jokes as if I didn't feel the sting. I told myself that it would all be worth it one day, that being a successful Black woman was revolution enough. But as I got older, as the successes I had reached for slowly became a reality, something inside me began to shift. I would try to make my voice quieter in meetings, and I couldn't. I would try to laugh off the racist jokes, and I couldn't. I would try to accept my boss's reasons for why I could have my promotion but not my raise, and I couldn't. And I started talking. I started to question. I started to resist. I started to demand. I wanted to know why it was considered a bad thing that I was opinionated. I wanted to know what exactly it was about my hair that was unprofessional. I wanted to know what exactly it was about that joke that people found funny. And once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I also started writing. I shifted my food blog into a me blog, and I started saying all the things that everybody around me had always said were too negative, too abrasive, and too confrontational. I started writing down my frustrations and my heartbreak. I started writing about my fears for my community and my family. I had started to see myself, and once you start to see yourself, you cannot pretend anymore. It did not go over well. My white friends, having grown up in Seattle, the majority of my friends were white, some of whom I'd known since high school, were not happy with the real me. This was not the deal they had struck. Yes, they would rage over global warming and yell about Republican shenanigans, but they would not say a word about the racial oppression and brutality facing people of color in this country. It's not my place, they'd explain, when in frustration I'd beg for some comment. I don't really feel comfortable. And as I looked around my town and I saw that my neighbors were not really my neighbors, as I saw that my friends were no longer considered me fun, I began to yell even louder. Somebody had to hear me. Somebody had to care. I could not be alone. Like dialysis, the old went out and in came the new. Suddenly, people I had never met were reaching out locally and from all across the country, in person and online, just to let me know that they had read my blog post and in reading it, they felt heard. Then, online publishers started reaching out to me, asking if they could republish my work. And locally, isolated and invisible people of color started reaching out, showing me that I did have neighbors after all. I was talking and writing at first for my very survival, not for anybody else's benefit. Thanks to the power and freedom of the internet, many other people of color have been able to speak their truths as well. We've been able to reach out across cities, states, even countries, to share and reaffirm that yes, what we are experiencing is true. But the internet has a very wide audience. And even though we were writing for ourselves, the power of the hurt, anger, fear, pride, and love of countless people of color could not go unnoticed by white people, especially those who were genuinely committed to fighting injustice. While some had chosen to turn away, upset at that this unpleasantness had invaded their space of cat videos and baby pictures, others drew closer, realizing that they had been missing something very important all along. These last few years, the rise of voices of color, coupled with the widespread dissemination of video proof of brutality and injustice against people of color, has brought the urgency of racism in America to the forefront of all of our consciousness. Race is not something people can choose to ignore anymore. Some of us have been speaking all along and have not been heard. Others are trying out their voices for the first time. These are very scary times for a lot of people who are just now realizing that America is not and has never been the melting pot utopia that their parents and teachers told them it was. These are very scary times for those who are just now realizing how justifiably hurt, angry, and terrified so many people of color have been all along. These are very stressful times for people of color who have been fighting and yelling and trying to protect themselves from a world that doesn't care, to suddenly be asked by those who've ignored them for so long, "What has been happening your entire life? Can you educate me?" Now that we're all in the room, how do we start the discussion? This is not just a gap in experience and viewpoint. The Grand Canyon is a gap. This is a chasm you could drop entire solar systems into. But no matter how daunting, you are here because you want to hear and you want to be heard. You are here because you know that something is very wrong and you want to change. We can find our way to each other. We can find our way to our truths. I've seen it happen. My life is a testament to it. And it all starts with conversation. So I'm going to leave it there. Didn't quite realize how long my introduction was. So, I'm here to talk about race. And I know that you're here because at least perhaps you might want to hear me talk about race, even if you don't want to talk about race yourself. I don't like talking about race. I can't stand it. I do not enjoy a minute of it. I would rather be talking about plenty of other things. I have to talk about race. And I want to make progress on issues of race. It's funny that I titled my book, So You Want to Talk About Race, because I don't really know a lot of people who actually want to talk about race, but I would guess saying, so you have to talk about race sounds a little odd, to put on a book. So why is it so hard? Race is not a new topic. This is not brand new. This doesn't seem that obscure. We have people of different races. Why can't we talk about it? Why has this been such a difficult subject for hundreds of years? There's a couple of reasons why. One of the main reasons why is because we are deliberately denied the tools we need to talk about it. And I say deliberately, I really firmly believe this. We must first understand that race is a system of power. It is a system designed to benefit some at the expense of others. By sheer convenience, when you need to pick a group of people who can be singled out, if they look different from another group, that's a pretty easy identifier, provided you're in the group that wins when you're setting up this system. One of the reasons why it has been so lasting is because it is very hard for Black people to no longer be Black people. Now, because this is a system of power, and it is a system of power that does a lot of harm, brutal, inhuman harm to a lot of people, and because fundamentally the vast majority of us do not want to sign on to systems that brutalize and murder fellow human beings, it is very important that we are unable to accurately describe what is happening in this system in order for that system to continue. I have met a lot of very committed racists in my life, but I have yet to actually come face to face with someone who says, I want to solely be responsible for the mass imprisonment, murder, and terror of people of color in this country. Even at that extreme, calling it what it is very difficult. Now, the reason why it is kept is not because everybody's bad and everyone's trying to lie. It's because the system needs us to continue to do nothing. And in order to do that, in order to stifle what would be our outrage at how unjust our system is, we have to not be able to describe it. It has to be the vague nothing that you can't make any progress. So often people come up to me and they say, it's too big. What can I do? I'm just one person. It's too much. You can't change a system that's been around for so long. But think of how long you've been told you can't change the system without actually being told what the system is. It's like Voldemort, like you just can't say it. If you say it, then it will be bad. But nobody knows what it is that they're so afraid of. Now, the good news is the thing that we actually are so afraid of is an economic, cultural, and political system. Not that scary. The thing we are afraid of is a collection of decisions we are making every day. Where we spend our money, how we vote, what we expect from our elected officials, what we deem as professional or unprofessional, or valued as unvalued. This collection of everyday decisions we make turns into a system of race. It upholds a system of race. That in the end, even if we don't know why it is we're participating in it, has a hefty payout for a very select few. And it is in their interest that we never stop and question what race actually is in this country and what racial oppression is in this country. So if you don't have the words for it, think of how often in school you were given the words for it. Even if you did that exercise where like half your class had blue eyes and half your class had brown eyes, were you then given the words to actually talk about race in your house or with your friends? Were you actually given the words beyond this makes people feel bad as to what the impact that has on society? On, let's say, the employment outcomes for people of color in this country? Throughout every one of our efforts to get forward on this, we kind of stop at the whole, stop doing mean things to people of color because it hurts their feelings. And then we wonder why we don't get anywhere. Which brings me to one of the other reasons why it's so hard to talk about race. Because we want this to be about intentions. We want to be good people, and we want to be seen as good people. And we all know that racism is bad, right? We've been told this forever, and it is. I'm not here to like shock you and say, it's good. That part's true. There's just a lot more to it. Our idea of a racist, right, is someone who like can't stop shouting the N-word, right? Or yelling that like Mexicans are coming to take all your jobs. Or it's someone on horseback lighting a cross in someone's lawn. These are people with hate in their hearts who want to do harm. Now this stops us from being able to talk about race because when someone says, you did this thing and it was racist, and it hurt me, you don't want to be in that group. You yourself have never said the N-word in your life. You are a good person. You don't want to be a bad person. But that's not the way race works. The personal outcomes for people of color in our society is not built upon how many racial slurs have been hurled at them in their lifetime. It is not Black households in this country have 13 times less net worth than white households because they were called the N-word this many times and every time their bank account dropped. That's not how race works. Furthermore, there are plenty of people who would shout racial slurs at me all day. And outside of that moment of terror, which it does have, they have no other impact on my life. There are plenty of people who dedicate their lives to racism, who aren't registered to vote, who don't hold any positions of social power, who kind of stick around with other white people who hate people of color and never leave that weird little hovel. They aren't impacting me nearly as much as someone who has a Black Lives Matter poster in their window, but then votes for tighter policing because she's a little scared about the way the demographics of her neighborhood is changing, right? When it comes to my safety and my ability to live, she is making a much bigger negative impact on my life and the life of my family and the life of my friends. And that's where we have to realize that in a system that only requires that you do nothing in order to continue to perpetrate itself, your intentions don't mean squat. So if you did not mean to harm someone, it does not mean that the harm wasn't done. And it does not mean that you then hate them and you must be discarded. But it also doesn't mean that they must immediately forgive you and act like it never happened. But it's very hard to talk about race when we can't update our ideas of what racial oppression actually looks like and what racism looks like when it hits people of color. One second. It's also really tough to talk about because we never actually say what we're trying to talk about. What we're doing when we're talking about race, usually, is we have people who are trying to come to their own personal goals. And usually people of color coming to talk about race are trying to get other people to understand what is harming them. And very often white people come to talks about race to try and make sure the person they're talking to knows that they are not the person who is harming them. Those are two completely different conversations that will never meet. Because you have one person whose lived experience says, you are harming me and I need you to understand. And you have another person whose lived experience says, I am not part of the problem, I am a good person and I need you to understand. Because we don't state what it is that we're trying to talk about when we talk about race, you can dissolve an entire friendship in a discussion. And if you were to ask why of each person in that discussion, the reasons would be completely different. So we know it is tough. We know there's a lot at risk. And if you are a white person in this room, and most of you are, and you're thinking, what if I get called racist? Oh, last time I tried a couple times, it ended really bad. Trust me, no conversation on race has ever ended nearly as bad for you as it ends for people of color. So before we launch into why we have to do it anyways, I want to first say, if a person of color is willing to talk to you about race, even if they don't seem very friendly while they're doing it, it's a generosity. I asked a lot of my friends when I was working on my book, what are your greatest fears about talking about race? And a lot of white people were like, oh, I'm just afraid of being seen as a racist. I'm really afraid, that I'll get dragged on Black Twitter. And then my friends of color were like, I'm afraid I'm going to get fired from my job. I'm afraid I will be physically attacked. I'm afraid I will be harassed. And there were plenty of people who said, I have been harassed. I currently have a restraining order out on someone who I said was racist and then tried to ruin my entire life. I have people of color who have actual threats to their life and liberty and their ability to feed their families. And then you have white people who are afraid that they will be called racist. So note, when people of color come to these discussions, first off, they're already bringing their pain that you do not know. They're bringing a damage that has already been done. And they're bringing it to you knowing that there's probably a 90% chance this conversation isn't going to go well. That they're going to lose out. They're going to be seen as angry at best. They'll be dismissed as, too overly race-focused. And that they will lose esteem for you, which hurts them. They may lose a friend in the process of just trying desperately to get you to see their humanity. So think about how generous it is to have a lifetime of experience that says, this is not going to end well for you. And you do it anyway. And then wonder, should you really be that afraid to join them, to meet them halfway? Should you really be that afraid to talk to your uncle at the dinner table when he says something a bit off? It's something we have to talk about. So why is it something we have to talk about? First of all, we're always talking about it. And I think that this is something that people always forget. We live in a society with a white default. Everything is whiteness. Our holidays, our calendar, what we view as professional, our films, our books, the art that we call fine art versus the art that we call ethnic art. We live in a world defined by whiteness. I understand a lot about white people. I grew up here in Seattle, and I was raised by a white mother. But I will never know what it's like to be able to walk around in a world built for me and never have to say it was built for me. To never have to recognize white culture as white culture. I always have to recognize Black culture as Black culture because even if I'm going about my day in my Blackness, someone's going to make it apparent. I am doing something that is outside of the norm. Walking around in my hair, people make it very apparent. Whether it's the weird comments about how glad they are that I've embraced who I am, or the comments about how it's a little, oh, that's wild, that's funky, I like it. It's not wild or funky, it's the hair that grows out of my head. I don't walk up to everyone who gets out of the shower, comes to work and go, wild, funky, it's kind of stringy, I like it. We live in a culture defined by whiteness, which means that anytime you're not talking about race, you're talking about whiteness. What you're basically saying is, everything is white until I deem it otherwise. And you're saying, here, people of color, you navigate that. You navigate this culture 24 hours a day until I am comfortable enough to ask if maybe it doesn't always suit you. If maybe I need to be the one to step around and try a different path. We like to act as if it's people of color always bringing up race. But if I go for a job interview and the way that my hair grows out of my head is not deemed professional, I am not making it about race. I'm the one who, because those doing the interview didn't stop to think about their definition and whether or not it included everyone who might show up for a job, who has to figure out what professional means to white people, and then has to go and modify the hair that goes out of my head in a way to fit that. I don't want to make it about race. I would like to just show up in the hair that grows out of my head. I didn't make it about race. And me saying, hey, I should be able to show up with the hair that comes out of my head is my attempt to no longer make it about race, to no longer make it about whiteness. So often these issues that you find yourself saying, why does it always have to be about race? It's because it was about race when you decided that the only people who needed to be considered were white. That's what made it about race. And oftentimes people of color are trying to get it back to a place where it's not. We have to talk about it because right now we are all harming other people. Because we have spent a lifetime absorbing incredibly harmful messaging about people of different races, about people of color. That means I have spent a lifetime absorbing harmful messaging about Asian Americans, about Indigenous people, about Latinx Americans, and about Black Americans. It means everyone here has. And when you say something and it hits a person of color, and they know deep inside that that's not right, but they're not comfortable telling you, you are missing the opportunity to become a better person and to stop hurting people. If you don't want to talk about it, what you're saying is, you just continue to carry that hurt. And the next person after you should continue to carry that hurt. Because the thought of carrying my piece of it and doing the work necessary to stop is just a little too much. I would rather continue the blissful ignorance of doing harm and having other people pick up the mess. I don't think that's the type of person you want to be. I myself personally in my work have to constantly challenge that because even as a Black woman, there is a lot of messaging I have absorbed about people of color that in my work requires me to face and recognize where I may have harmed people and try to make amends. Because as much as it stings to know I've hurt someone, I would rather know so I can do better than continue to think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread while I'm hurting everyone in my path. We have to talk about race because it's the only way to identify solutions. What we're talking about here is not just big group therapy. where we're crying and hugging our way out of this. I honestly don't believe that will work, and I really don't want people to hug me. I am talking about identifying where we are missing opportunities to be a part of the solution. And that actually means you have to talk to the people and find out where the problem is. And we miss a lot of opportunities. Think of the last time a friend of yours made a joke that just wasn't cool, and you decided to let it go. Now, if you are a white person and you hear a joke that's not cool and you decide to let it go because you don't want to ruin the evening, think about who never gets the opportunity to make that choice. I don't get the opportunity. My evening's ruined. I don't even, there's no saving it. My evening's ruined. My relationship with that person is forever altered. I don't get a chance to say I'm going to not be Black for the evening and not have that hurt me. I don't get to say, I'm going to wait until next month and then maybe I'll bring it up. If they, make a joke at the expense of my humanity again, then I'll bring it up. No matter what, I'm harmed. We have to talk about it. Because what we are doing not only causes hurt feelings, not only causes trauma, but it has actual measurable impacts in the well-being for people of color in this country. So if you don't understand what the school to prison pipeline looks like, and you haven't heard from mothers of Black children whose kindergartners have been dragged out of their classrooms by school police officers, then you will not make an informed voting choice when it comes to your local school board. Chances are you probably won't even vote for it, especially if it's an off year. And you're going to leave that 10% of the population most at risk to fight that battle on their own. And then you'll wonder, as your kid gets older, why these Black kids can't just get it together. Why are they always getting suspended? Why are they always getting expelled? And you'll think it's their problem. When you had an opportunity 4 years earlier to put in school board members who could say, we're going to take a look at the way in which we are disciplining children of color to see if it's fair, to see if it's in the best interest of these children. If you don't talk to people of color about how hard it is for them to access resources in their neighborhood, how you vote for taxes and levies in your city and state that could give money to neighborhoods that don't even have working sidewalks. And we do have stretches here in the Seattle area that don't have working sidewalks. Kids are walking to school on busy highways. Then you're not going to vote accordingly because your street's fine. But you didn't want to talk about race and why money is kept from these neighborhoods. Why so much if it's about how wealthy the tax bracket is for that neighborhood. And then you wonder why people aren't rising up when they can't even get to school safely, when they can't have updated books in their classrooms, when the nearest grocery store that would give them the nutrition they need to be able to pay attention through the day is 1.5 miles away and there's no real good bus routes. But we're going to keep voting to lower our tabs, right? Without looking at the impact that has on the people who need reliable, low-cost transportation more than anyone else. These are conversations, these are solutions you come to when you talk about race. But they are also solutions you are rejecting when you don't talk about race. It is not just something from the heaven comes down and says, would you like a bonus solution for race today? And you accept it and you're glad for this extra. These are responsibilities that you're abdicating, that no one else will pick up. These are opportunities that you are morally obligated to take, that you are denying, because you don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. Now, it's not as easy, and please, for the love of God, do not rush out of here, find the nearest Black person in the office and be like, hey, let's have a conversation about race. Please. There's a reason why there's a lot of chapters in my book. Because we have to do this in a way that is not putting even more of a burden on marginalized people. But it definitely can be done. And first, I would say, start Googling. Google, oh my gosh, you guys, right? Start Googling. There's not a question you have that hasn't been asked. There's not a sticky situation you're in that someone else hasn't been in. Before you stop and say, I'm going to go and talk to Letitia, and she's going to be my new dictionary of race relations, Google it. Figure out what you're talking about. Read my book. Get some pointers. And then start looking in everyday opportunities to have conversations, not just with people of a different race from you, but people in your own race, especially if you're white in this audience. Please start talking to other white people about this, because there's only like 5 black people in this entire city. Like, we can't have all these conversations. And make sure that you're talking to people of multiple races. I speak as a black woman. I write as a black woman. My experience in this world, though, is not the same as it is for a Latinx woman, right? Or an Asian American man. And you can't say, I talked to a black person, they're cool with it, we're fine. But come to it knowing that as hard as it is, it's always going to give you an opportunity to be a better person and to make a difference in this world. And that should excite you, because for the first time, you may actually see an ability to make progress where you've been told forever that you couldn't, that there were just some people that were always going to hate and some people like you that were going to love. And maybe one day love would win, and then you wonder why things aren't getting better. You will have actual measurable things you can do to make it better. But it starts with conversation. So that's kind of my talk. And now, yeah, he's walking around, so I think, yeah. I hope there will be questions.
So I decided I wanted to come to a talk that was called So You Want to Talk About Race. I was kind of sold already on that seems like a good idea. One of my main takeaways was that if I end up talking about race with somebody who is not white, that they will have a bad time. How do you reconcile those?
I mean, that's the thing, is it's almost, I've never left a conversation about race, especially with someone of a different race, and been like, man, that was fun. I want you to come to that knowing that the reason why people engage with it is because that's how urgent it is. So there are things you want to do, there are things you need to do. Now, that means that there are going to be times where, even as painful as it is, I am dying to talk about race, because I know that's the only thing that's going to make this situation better, or the only thing that's going to make it seem like I'm not completely invisible to the people around me. It's like you're walking around and your world is on fire, and people are literally going, God, I am so cold, and like putting on parkas, and you're dying. And you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? No, you don't want to talk about what that feels like. You don't want to be like, let me explain to you for an hour what it's like to be this hot. But sometimes, you know, if I don't get someone to ask, why are you so hot right now? I'm going to actually die. And that's oftentimes what talking about race is. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't be rewarding in the end, even if it's not pleasant. Because I do think when these do go well, and the more of these that do, it will shift. Part of the reason why it's not pleasant is because most of the time it goes really bad. And so we're already entering in talking about pain we're going through, knowing that chances are all of that investment isn't going to pay off. So part of it is committing to be someone who it might pay off. You know, be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to try my best to be a little different and listen and hear and be here.
All right. So how do I present as someone who is less likely to cause somebody I'm having a conversation with to have a bad time without like giving everyone a minority tax or being like, hey, you're a black person. Mm.
Yeah, you know, I would definitely say, first off, always try and gauge people's comfort level in a conversation, right? So people, of course, especially because of the work I do, want to talk to me about race a lot. And in fact, sometimes people kind of save the conversations they've been afraid to have with anyone else for me. But when people gauge my comfort level, say, hey, I had a question about something with race, or I was wondering if maybe this was something you wanted to talk about. Are you comfortable? Is this a good time? If not, I fully understand. Start that way. Because a lot of times what happens is people get really eager and they think, I'm going to make a person of color's day today. I'm going to go up to them and start asking them about race. And that's just not the way to go about it. But it happens more than you would assume. And instead saying, are you comfortable? Do you feel safe? Do you want to have this conversation? Oftentimes, even that alone, like knowing that someone took the time to even wonder if I want to have that conversation is a good sign to me. It's going to go better because it's already starting with listening. It's already starting with consideration for me as a human. So I definitely start there. And then always take time to pause and make sure you're listening more than you're talking, and that you're stating your intentions, and that you're checking in and looking for signals that someone is still comfortable. If they're not, say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. We can totally pause or abandon this conversation entirely. But a lot of times what ends up happening is you'll start a conversation and it'll veer into areas that are no longer safe and comfortable for people of color. And then it becomes, well, I thought you wanted to end racism. Why aren't you still talking to me about it? But the truth is this will be the 20th conversation I'm going to have today. I need to be able to reserve what I have left and move on. So I would say definitely starting with finding their comfort level if they want to talk about it or not, and stating why it is you want to talk about it are going to get you probably at least halfway there to having a conversation that's going to be one of the ones that actually surprises people of color by going pretty well.
So you're a parent, I'm a parent, and I'm unfortunately grew up in a household where when race was brought up, it was always negative. And I knew when I had my children, and even just growing up, that wasn't the type of household I wanted to have. I want to know what I can be doing to be a better parent, to be teaching my kids how to have these conversations, how to be better people as far as, how they're treating their friends and the people that they encounter every day properly.
It's a great question. I'm assuming you have white kids?
Yeah.
Okay. What I would definitely say, and I refer to this quite often because I think it's a really good example. I was actually talking with an associate a while back. He was asking me about what it was like, this was a white man, he was asking me what it was like to have to explain to my kids about avoiding cops and what police brutality is and why store clerks might follow them around, things like this. And he said, I'm so glad I don't have to have that conversation with my kids. And I paused and I was like, why don't you have to have that conversation with your kids? It's like, well, you know what I mean. I'm like, no, I really don't, because you're grateful that your kids have been spared this painful conversation, but your kids are in community with my kids. Why would your kids be spared this conversation? Why would they be spared the knowledge of what their friends are dealing with? Why would they be spared the opportunity to lift that burden, at least some of it, by showing at least they understand? It's really important to realize your kids are going to be absorbing what's happening in the world no matter what. And you have to provide context. And you have to provide empowerment and places of action. So personally, I have, of course, 2 kids of color. And so I talk with them oftentimes to see outside their own experience to other kids of color, maybe kids of different races. What I like to do, especially when we're listening to the news and you hear all these awful things happening and kids really feel powerless. They feel like grown-ups are kind of screwing everything up for them, and they are. Yep. And there's nothing they can do about it. So I always like to talk with my kids about solutions that they can help be a part of, right? They have no power as to who's president in this country, but they have a lot of power as to what their friends at school are saying to other kids at school, right? They have the power to raise their hand to the teacher and say, hey, I don't think that's right. So we like to listen to the news, and especially, both my teenager is kind of he thinks he's got it all figured out, right? So I don't know, he's absorbing probably half of it. I talk nonstop, and he's like, yeah, Mom, I know. No, Mom, I have the internet. My 10-year-old, on the other hand, is incredibly passionately concerned about what's happening, right? He's very concerned about immigration, very, very concerned about immigration. He has friends who come home whose parents have told them they might have to go away one day, right? He's very, very concerned about transgender rights. And so these are things where instead of saying, yeah, man, it sucks, the world is horrible, because you grow up being an adult that just says that. Instead, I think, okay, well, you know what? Chances are right now, you have kids in your class who are worried about where their parents are going to be. So are you talking with your friends about this issue and letting them know that you support them? Are you listening for kids who might be saying hateful things that their parents are saying and challenging that? Right? You have kids in your class who may one day come out as transgender. So are you making sure that no one is saying anything that would harm them right now? Are you talking to your teachers about the bathrooms? Maybe there's something that can be done about your school bathrooms, right? Giving them the opportunity to know there's always a way to be reaching out and finding solutions even in their own little corner. And that not only is going to keep them being solution-oriented and reaching out and looking out, but it's also going to keep them feeling empowered so they don't enter adulthood jaded and feeling like there's nothing they can do about it. Mm-hmm.
Hello. I actually have the privilege of having the last question, so just FYI. First of all, thank you so much for putting on this talk. You're a wonderful writer and speaker as well, so thank you very much. I wanted to ask if you have any advice for someone who is a person of color, Black specifically, who is navigating a white workplace. I have worked at Google for about 1.5 years, and I didn't know that I was only going to be like the only Black female engineer here, and that's that's cool. But sometimes I wish I wasn't. Do you have any advice for like feeling kind of alone and feeling like you want to be with people who look like you?
I understand that feeling. Before I was a writer, I actually worked in tech for a decade, and I was always the only Black person, except for once I had a Black supervisor. I know that feeling. And it's a very lonely place to be, and unfortunately, because of the way the world is, the more you rise up, the more lonely you end up. And first off, that's a completely normal way to feel. It definitely is. I would say twofold. One, personally, you have to find community, even if it's not in work. And I know it's hard because we spend so much time at work, and especially in fields like this, but you gotta find community, you gotta find people. There are groups of Black people in the greater Seattle area, especially tech-focused Black people, that kind of seek each other out. So definitely, hit me up after this if you have any questions on that. So definitely do that. But then also, I would say, always know it's gonna be harder to change the rules of how people engage with you later than it is to set it up front. And that's something I started learning about halfway through my tech career when I was in tech, was there are a lot of compromises we find ourselves having to make, things we don't talk about, things we don't address, right, in order to get where we are. What I realized was the further I got, the harder it was to go back and correct. And so I had to always weigh, in smart ways, right, to not get my ass fired, how to challenge things so that people knew from the moment they started doing business with me that I was going to be challenging these assumptions. So I started with a lot of innocent questions, right? My favorite thing to do would be, what do you mean? What does that mean? I'm sorry, I just don't understand. And I'm not trying to be like, no, what do you mean? I'm like, no, I don't get it. I don't get, what does that joke mean? What's funny about that thing, I always like to point out those little things just to be like, not like, we're gonna have a discussion about this, but like, I remember one time there was this thing at work that used to drive me bonkers. It actually still happens to me even as a writer online, where I'd say I'm hungry, and someone would try and give me cheese all the time. People would be like, cheese. I don't know what it is about Seattle white people and cheese. I don't know if this is like a Swedish thing. I don't know. People are like, oh man, go get you some cheese. And I'm like, I hope you understand the majority of Black people are lactose intolerant. I'm like, are you trying to not only ruin my day, but your day? Because you have to sit next to me. And it wasn't like, how dare you not know this? It was just like, hey, where? And every time people were like, what do you mean? Or I'd say, yeah, no, cheese isn't gonna work for me because I'm Black. Sometimes I would leave it at that because then people would be like, what do you mean? And think a little bit, is there something like, yeah, no, it's magic. Cheese is my mortal enemy. Like, no, actually, the majority of people of color, not just Black people, Asian people, Indigenous people, we don't do cheese too well. And like get people starting to think, and I would start to challenge a lot of those things, you know. We would have get-togethers for work and be like, hey, did you know that's not necessarily that cool dive bar you think it would be fun to slum in with the Confederate flag hanging in the corner? Not necessarily a place where I'm gonna be safe. And I would just constantly, and like a very even keel, say these things. And I learned that when people started to figure out that I was never actually gonna let those things go, but it wasn't gonna turn into a fight. Sometimes it was just like, well, it's less annoying if I actually start thinking about these things ahead of time and start really addressing them. But I would definitely say find community. Learn, you know, what compromises you are and are not willing to make early, and think, if I make it all the way to VP, do I still wanna be ignoring these jokes? Do I still wanna be having these horrible conversations? Do I still want to be acting like my needs are being met when they're not? Because believe it or not, it's actually harder when you get to that level to have those conversations than now. I hope that helps. I mean, unfortunately, you shouldn't have to be asking these questions.
Absolutely.
And hopefully people listening in this room will help make it so that that won't be a case, right?
I mostly ask this question for their benefit, not mine, to be honest.
I like the way you think.
So thank you very much for coming to talk to us today.